I trusted my husband with my life. That is not a figure of speech. I mean it in the most literal way possible. When I was admitted to the hospital, I handed him my wedding ring, my phone, and my sense of time. I let the nurses speak to him first. I let the doctors explain things to him while I lay there trying to keep my breathing steady. I believed that whatever decisions needed to be made, he would make them with me in mind. I did not know that while I was lying in a hospital bed, he was signing papers that quietly removed me from my own life. And the most frightening part is this: no one told me he wasn't allowed to. The day I went into the hospital felt ordinary until it wasn't. It started with dizziness, the kind that makes the room tilt just slightly, enough to make you question whether you should sit down or push through it. I told myself it was nothing. I always told myself that. I had spent most of my marriage being the one who pushed through things so other people wouldn't have to worry. By the time the nausea started, I knew I was lying to myself. My husband drove me to the hospital. He was calm, focused. He parked the car, helped me walk inside, spoke clearly to the receptionist while I leaned against the counter and tried not to close my eyes. He knew my birthday, my medications, my history. He had always been good in moments like this. When they took me back, I remember the sound of the curtain sliding shut, the fluorescent lights overhead, the smell of disinfectant that never quite goes away. A nurse asked me questions while another wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm. My husband stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, listening. When the doctor arrived, my husband answered most of the questions before I could. "She's been under a lot of stress lately," he said. "She forgets to eat sometimes. She doesn't always rest when she should." None of it was false, but none of it was the whole truth. I remember the doctor nodding, then turning toward him more than toward me. I did not think anything of it at the time. I trusted him. They decided to keep me overnight for observation. They said it was precautionary, routine, nothing to panic about. My husband squeezed my hand and told me he would take care of everything. I let go. That is when trust becomes dangerous. When you stop watching because you believe someone else is. The hours blurred together. Nurses came and went. Machines hummed softly beside the bed. I drifted in and out of sleep, catching pieces of conversations without fully understanding them. At one point, I woke up to voices outside the curtain. My husband's voice was low, steady. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases. Long-term planning, best interest, temporary authority. I thought they were talking about my care. I was wrong. Later, when I woke again, a nurse handed me a clipboard. "Just confirming some information," she said kindly. I scanned the page without really reading it. My name was there, my date of birth, a list of medications. Everything looked normal. I signed. No one explained that while I was signing one form, my husband had already signed another, a different kind of paper, the kind that does not require the person being affected to be fully aware. That night, I watched the ceiling and listened to the quiet beeping of the monitor beside me. I felt safe in a way only married people understand. The safety of knowing someone else is holding the world together while you rest. I did not know that the world I was resting in was already being rearranged. The next morning, my husband arrived early. He looked tired, but composed. "We're just making sure everything is handled," he said, "so you don't have to worry about anything when you get home." I smiled. I told him I was grateful. That is the sentence that still echoes in my head. Because while I was thanking him, he was already holding documents that said I was no longer the one in control, and I did not even know what had been taken yet. When people are worried about you, they change the way they speak, not all at once, not dramatically. The words soften first. After the second night in the hospital, the doctors told me I was improving. My blood work was stabilizing. The dizziness had faded. They said I could probably go home within a day or two. I felt relief spread through my body, the kind that loosens your shoulders without you realizing they were tense. My husband nodded along as they spoke. That should have reassured me. Instead, something about the way he nodded felt measured, like he was agreeing with a version of events that existed slightly to the side of what I was hearing. Once the doctors left, he pulled his chair closer to the bed. "How are you really feeling?" he asked. I told him the truth, that I was tired, that hospitals drain you in ways you cannot explain, that I wanted to sleep in my own bed again. He watched me carefully as I spoke. "You have been pushing yourself for a long time," he said. "Longer than you admit." I smiled faintly. "That's not new," I said. He didn't smile back. "That worries me," he replied. "Worries me." Concern always starts there. Over the next day, his sentences began to change. Instead of asking how I felt, he told others how I felt. "She gets overwhelmed easily," he said to a nurse while I sat there listening. "She tends to downplay things. She doesn't always recognize when she needs help." Each statement was close enough to the truth to sound reasonable. Each one moved me slightly out of the room. When a caseworker stopped by to talk about discharge planning, my husband pulled his chair up again. "We just want to make sure she has enough support at home," he said. Support sounded harmless. I told them I was fine, that I had managed the house for years, that this was temporary. The caseworker smiled politely. "Your husband is just being proactive," she said. Proactive. That word landed differently. Later that afternoon, I overheard my husband on the phone in the hallway. He didn't see me sitting upright behind the curtain. He spoke quietly. "She doesn't like to admit when she's struggling," he said. "I'm worried about her judgment right now. I just want to avoid a bigger problem later." Judgment. That word did not belong to my illness. That night, when he thought I was asleep, I felt him gently move my bag from the chair beside my bed. I heard the soft sound of paper shifting. The next morning, a new nurse introduced herself. She spoke slowly, carefully. "We're just going to go over a few things again," she said. "Make sure everything is clear." Clear to whom, I wondered. She asked me simple questions. The date, where I was, why I was there. I answered easily. She nodded, but still glanced at my husband. When she left, I asked him what that was about. "Routine," he said quickly. "They do that sometimes," but his voice was too smooth. Later that day, the doctor returned with an updated plan. She spoke to both of us, but her body angled toward him. Your husband has raised some concerns about how much stress you're under at home, she said. I looked at him. He did not meet my eyes. She continued, nothing formal, just observations. We want to make sure decisions are made in a way that protects you. Protect me. I felt a flicker of unease. I told her I was capable of making decisions. Of course, she said gently. This is just about support. Support had now been repeated enough times to feel rehearsed. That evening, my husband brought me tea from the cafeteria. He sat down and sighed. I don't want you to think I'm going behind your back, he said. That sentence alone should have stopped me cold. I told him I didn't think that. He reached for my hand. You've been through a lot, he said. And sometimes when people are vulnerable, they don't realize how vulnerable they are. Vulnerable. I asked him what he meant. He chose his words carefully. I just don't want you making decisions you might regret, he said, especially if you're not feeling like yourself. I asked him directly if he had signed anything. He hesitated. Only standard hospital stuff, he said. Things they require when someone is admitted. I believed him, because concern still sounds like love when you are not ready to hear the difference. The next day, the discharge paperwork arrived. This time, the nurse handed the clipboard to him first. He skimmed it, then passed it to me. Sign here, he said softly, just acknowledging receipt. I signed. Again, that afternoon, I noticed a subtle change. People no longer asked me what I wanted. They asked if I was comfortable with what had been decided. Comfortable is not the same as consenting. That night, as the lights dimmed and the hallway quieted, I lay awake thinking about the words that had been used all day. Support, concern, vulnerability, protection. They sounded kind. They felt heavy. I realized then that something had shifted. No one was accusing me of being incapable. They were simply behaving as though the question had already been answered, and my husband was no longer speaking as my partner. He was speaking as my interpreter. That was the moment I understood something important. Concern does not need proof to become justification. It only needs repetition, and once it is written down, it does not matter how clearly you speak. It matters who they believe is speaking for you. The first time I saw the paperwork, I did not recognize it as a threat. It looked ordinary, clean, official in the way hospital documents always are. White pages, black ink, headings that sounded responsible and neutral. Forms do not announce themselves as weapons. They sit quietly until someone decides how to use them. It happened the morning they told me I could go home. I was sitting upright in the bed, already dressed, my bag packed and resting on the chair beside me. I felt lighter, ready. The kind of relief that comes when you believe something difficult is ending. A nurse came in with a clipboard and a practiced smile. We just need to review a few things before discharge, she said. She placed the clipboard on the rolling table, not directly in front of me, slightly to the side, closer to my husband. That detail stayed with me. She began reading aloud. Medication instructions. follow-up appointments, activity restrictions, normal things. Then she paused and glanced at my husband. We also have documentation on file regarding decision support, she said. Decision support. I looked up. What documentation? I asked. The nurse hesitated, then smiled again, softer this time. Your husband has been listed as the primary contact for decision assistance if needed, she said. It is a precaution. Precaution. I told her I did not need assistance making decisions. She nodded quickly. Of course, she said. This is just in case. In case of what? I asked. She did not answer directly. Your husband expressed concern about stress impacting your judgment, she said carefully. There it was. Not confusion. Not incapacity. Judgment. A word chosen because it sounds temporary. Forgivable. Humans. I turned to my husband. You told them that, I said. He did not deny it. I told them what I was seeing, he replied. That you have been under a lot of pressure. Pressure. I had lived through decades of pressure. Work. Loss. Responsibility. I had never needed permission to survive it before. I asked the nurse if anything had been finalized. She glanced at the clipboard. There are authorizations on file, she said. Nothing permanent. Permanent. Another careful word. After she left, I asked my husband what he had signed. He sat down slowly. Just standard forms, he said. Temporary authority to help manage things if you were not up to it. I asked him why I was not asked. Because you were sick, he replied, and I did not want to burden you. Burden. That word landed differently than concern. I told him I wanted to see everything. He frowned. There is no need to upset yourself, he said. I insisted. Later that afternoon, a hospital administrator came by. She spoke kindly, but with distance. The kind of distance people use when they believe something has already been settled. She explained that notes had been added to my file. Observations, reports from family. I asked if any of it was based on medical testing. She said no. I asked if anyone had evaluated my cognitive ability. She said not formally. I asked why my decision-making was being questioned. She paused. Your husband raised concerns, she said. And we are obligated to document concerns raised by immediate family. Document. That was the word that changed everything, because once something is documented, it stops being an opinion. It becomes a reference. I asked for copies of my records. She seemed surprised. Of course, she said. It may take a bit of time. That evening, my husband became quiet. He did not argue. He did not reassure me. He watched me the way people watch something they are afraid might move out of their control. The next morning, I received the copies. I sat in the chair by the window and read slowly. There it was. The patient appears overwhelmed. Patients may struggle with complex decisions under stress. Spouse recommends supportive oversight. Recommended, not confirmed. Recommended. My name was still there. My signature still mattered. But my capacity was now described instead of assumed. That is how language shifts power, not by removing you, by redefining you. I realized then that my husband had not taken anything yet. He had done something far more dangerous. He had created a paper version of me that sounded reasonable to strangers, and that version did not argue. It did not object. It did not interrupt. It simply allowed others to step in. That was the moment fear became clarity. Because documents do not care how you feel. They care how you are described. And someone else had started writing my description for me. The change did not happen all at once. That is what makes it so difficult to explain to people afterward. There was no single moment where someone stood at the foot of my bed and announced that I no longer had authority over my own life. Instead, the room rearranged itself around me. I noticed it first in the way people stood. When the doctor came in that afternoon, she greeted me politely, then turned her body toward my husband, not fully. Just enough that I could feel it. She spoke about next steps, about follow-up care, about recommendations. She asked him if that sounded reasonable. I waited for her to ask me. She did not. I interrupted, gently. I would like to go home tomorrow, I said. The doctor paused. She glanced at my husband. We were thinking it might be better to take a little more time, she replied. Just to be safe. Safe. I asked what risk she was referring to. She chose her words carefully. Given the concerns that have been raised, she said, we want to make sure decisions are made with full support. Full support. It was becoming clear that support now meant supervision. I looked at my husband. He avoided my eyes. After the doctor left, I asked him directly what he had told her. He sighed, like someone exhausted by a conversation he had already had. I told her you've been struggling more than you admit, he said, that you get anxious, that you second-guess yourself. I asked him if he had told her I was incapable. He shook his head. Of course not, he said. I would never say that. But he did not need to, because he had done something more effective. He had framed me. That evening, a case manager stopped by. She brought brochures, home care services, transitional support, short-term residential recovery. She laid them out neatly on the table, as if organizing options I had requested. I told her I was not interested. She smiled sympathetically. Many people say that at first. She said, first, I asked her what would happen if I declined. She folded her hands. Then we would need to document refusal and escalate recommendations, she replied. Escalate. The word sat between us like a quiet threat. I asked her to explain what escalation meant. She did not answer directly. It means involving additional oversight, she said. Oversight. I realized then that I was no longer being asked. I was being informed. That night, I barely slept, not because of pain, but because of the way the room felt smaller than it had the night before. The walls were the same. The bed was the same, but my position within it had changed. The next morning, my husband arrived early. He brought coffee for himself. He did not bring one for me. He sat down and spoke as though continuing a conversation I had missed. I think it would be best if you stayed somewhere else for a while after discharge, he said. Somewhere else. I asked him what he meant. Just until things stabilize, he replied. You don't need the stress of managing the house right now. Managing the house. My house. I told him I was not leaving my home. He leaned back in his chair. This is exactly what I mean, he said quietly. You're reacting emotionally. I asked him when concern had turned into planning my removal. He looked genuinely surprised by the word. Removed is a strong term, he said. I'm talking about care. Care. I asked him why he had not discussed any of this with me before speaking to the hospital. Because you wouldn't have agreed, he said. There it was. Not inability. Disagreement. And disagreement, I was learning, could be treated as evidence. That afternoon, a nurse came in to go over discharge timing. She spoke kindly, but slowly. We're just waiting on final clearance, she said. Your husband is helping coordinate things. Helping. I asked her if I could speak with someone privately. She hesitated. Of course, she said. When we were alone, I told her I felt decisions were being made without me. She listened, nodded. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. Your husband is listed as the primary decision support right now, she said. That gives him a lot of involvement. Involvement. I asked how that could be changed. She told me I would need to speak with the administration. Administration. Everything now required a higher level, more structure, more paperwork, more distance. When my husband returned, he was calm, almost relieved. I think this is for the best, he said. You don't see how tired you are. I looked at him and realized something painful. He was not confused. He was confident. Confident that the language now favored him, that the system believed him, that my resistance could be framed as further proof. The shift was complete. I was still in bed, still conscious, still speaking. But I was no longer being positioned as the one in charge. I was being managed. And that was when I understood the danger. Not that I would be ignored, but that everything I said could now be used to explain why I should be. The confirmation did not come from my husband. It came from paper. The morning after the case manager visit, a woman I had never met walked into my room carrying a thin folder. She introduced herself as part of patient coordination. Her voice was calm, professional, neutral in a way that felt rehearsed. She said my name as if reading it for the first time. We just need to review a few things before discharge, she said. She pulled a chair closer to the bed and opened the folder. Inside were forms I did not recognize. She explained them slowly, like instructions meant to soothe. Temporary support designation, post-discharge safety plan, decision assistance acknowledgement. Each phrase sounded harmless on its own. Together, they formed something else. I asked her when these had been prepared. She glanced down. Your husband initiated the request yesterday, she said, based on concerns raised during your stay. Concerns. I asked her what those concerns were. She paused. Difficulty processing information under stress, she said. Emotional overwhelm. Increased reliance on others for decision-making. I felt my throat tighten. I asked if anyone had evaluated me for that. She hesitated. Not formally, she said. This is based on observation and family input. family input. I asked her if my disagreement with the plan counted as confusion. She smiled gently. "We don't frame it that way," she said. "We just want to make sure decisions are made smoothly." Smoothly. I asked what would happen if I refused to sign anything. She closed the folder. "Then we document refusal and adjust recommendations accordingly," she replied. "Adjust how?" I asked. She did not answer directly. She said we would involve additional support systems. Support systems. Everything was layered in words that sounded kind but carried weight. I asked her if my husband could sign without me. She looked uncomfortable. "In certain situations, yes," she said, "especially when safety is a concern." I asked her if my situation met that standard. She glanced toward the door. "Your husband feels strongly that it does," she replied. That was when I understood something critical. It no longer mattered what I felt. The system was now validating his version of me. Later that afternoon, my husband came in smiling, relieved. "They agree we should take things slowly," he said. "This is being handled properly now." Handled. I asked him what he had signed. He waved his hand dismissively. "Just some preliminary paperwork," he said. "Nothing permanent. Nothing permanent." I asked him if he had listed me as impaired. He frowned. "I said you were overwhelmed," he replied. "Which you are." I asked him if he had told them I couldn't decide for myself. He avoided the question. He said he was protecting me. That evening, a nurse came in with medication instructions. She spoke to my husband. She asked him questions. She handed him the packet. I watched. I said nothing at first. Then I asked if I could review it myself. She looked surprised. "Of course," she said. Then hesitated. "Your husband already has the copies." Already. When she left, I stared at the ceiling. I felt something inside me go very still. This was not chaos. This was organization. This was documentation. This was a story about me being written without me holding the pen. The next morning, I asked to see everything in my file. It took hours. When the papers finally arrived, they were clipped together neatly. Clinical notes, social work summaries, care recommendations, and threaded through all of it was the same quiet narrative. The patient appears anxious when discussing independent living. The patient defers to spouse for complex decisions. The spouse expresses concern about the patient's judgment under stress. Appears, defers, expresses concern. Nothing definitive, nothing provable, but enough to justify the shift, enough to make my objections look like symptoms, enough to turn my voice into noise. I realized then that the betrayal was no longer just personal. It had been institutionalized. My husband did not have to convince me anymore. He had convinced the system, and once that happens, truth becomes something you have to fight for. Not because you are wrong, but because you are outnumbered. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain how I felt and started paying attention to how things were being recorded. Because whatever was written next would decide what I was allowed to keep, including my name, including my home, including myself. The shift did not happen all at once. It happened in tone, in posture, in who people spoke to first. By the third day, Staff no longer asked me questions directly. They asked my husband, then glanced at me as if waiting for confirmation rather than contribution. "Do you think she is ready for discharge?" they would say to him. If she was confused today, they would ask him, "Is she sleeping better, eating better, or calmer?" Calmer. I noticed how often that word appeared. I noticed how often my answers were summarized instead of recorded. When I said I wanted to go home, the note read, "Patient expresses anxiety about discharge." When I said I needed time to review documents, the note read, "Patient hesitant to engage in planning." When I said I disagreed, the note read, "Patient resistant." Each word was small. Each one carried weight. One afternoon, a social worker came in with a clipboard and a practiced smile. She pulled the curtain halfway closed and sat near the bed. "We just want to make sure everyone feels supported," she said. "Everyone." She asked me how I was feeling. I told her I felt sidelined. She nodded slowly. "That can happen when emotions run high," she said. I told her I felt capable. She nodded again. "Of course you do," she replied. I asked her if feeling capable mattered. She paused. "It matters," she said carefully. "But safety matters more." I asked who decided what was safe. She smiled gently. "We look at patterns," she said. "Information, input from loved ones." I asked her if disagreement counted as danger. She did not answer directly. She said families go through stress during illness. She said sometimes roles shift. She said it was temporary. Everything was temporary, except the paperwork. Later that evening, I overheard my husband speaking with a nurse outside my room. His voice was low, concerned, earnest. "She does not see how bad it looks," he said. I froze. Look at whom, I wondered. He talked about my frustration, about my questions, about my insistence on reading things. "She has always been stubborn," he said softly. I waited for someone to object. No one did. That night, I asked him why he was describing me that way. He looked surprised. "I am just being honest," he said. I asked him honestly, "With people who are trying to help us," he replied. "Help us?" I asked him when helping me started diminishing me. He sighed. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," he said. I asked them harder questions. He did not answer. The next morning, a new form appeared at my bedside. Discharge planning authorization. My husband had already signed his portion. Mine was blank. I asked what would happen if I refused. The nurse hesitated. "Then the discharge may be delayed," she said. "Or additional evaluations may be required." Evaluations. I asked what kind. She said cognitive screening, psychological review, capacity assessment, all the words that turn a disagreement into a diagnosis. I felt the fracture then, not loud, not dramatic, just a clean break between how I understood myself and how I was being described. I realized something important. The more I protested, the more concerned I appeared. The calmer I tried to be, the more detached I seemed. There was no tone that would save me. My husband stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, watching. "You see why this is necessary," he said. I looked at him. at the man who had shared my bed for decades, at the man who knew my habits, my fears, my strengths, at the man who had chosen timing over truth. You signed papers while I was sedated, I said quietly. He did not deny it. Someone had to act, he replied. That was the fracture, not the signature, not the forms. The moment he decided that acting for me mattered more than listening to me, that was when I understood the danger. This was no longer about recovery. It was about control justified by concern. And once concern becomes proof, it is almost impossible to reverse, because no one wants to believe the calm voice in the bed over the worried one standing beside it. Especially when the paperwork agrees with him. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since I was admitted, I stopped trying to convince anyone and started thinking about what I would need to survive this. Not emotionally, legally, because whatever happened next would not depend on how reasonable I sounded. It would depend on what I could prove, and I knew then that I was running out of time. The realization did not arrive as fear. It arrived with clarity, the kind that settles in your chest when the noise finally stops and you understand the shape of what you are standing inside. It came the morning the neurologist entered my room. He introduced himself kindly, professionally. He shook my husband's hand first, then he nodded at me, as if greeting a colleague he would speak about, not with. He asked me to state my name. I did. He asked me for the date. I answered. He asked where I was. In a hospital, I said. Recovering from surgery. He smiled. Very good. Then he turned to my husband. Has she been disoriented lately? He asked. I felt something cold move through me. Disoriented how? I asked. The doctor glanced back at me briefly. We'll get to that, he said. No, I replied. Let's get to it now. My husband cleared his throat. She's been emotional, he said. Forgetful. Fixated on paperwork, very anxious. The doctor nodded and made a note. I watched the pen move. Every word my husband spoke landed softly and permanently. When I tried to respond, the doctor raised a hand gently. Let me finish my assessment, he said. Assessment. I realized then that I was not being evaluated for confusion. I was being evaluated for resistance. After the doctor left, a nurse came in with a new chart. I asked to see it. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I asked again. She handed it over. I read the language slowly. The patient appears guarded. The patient exhibits mistrust towards spouse. The patient demonstrates perseveration on legal matters. Perseveration. I looked up at her. Do you know what that word means? I asked. She shifted uncomfortably. I know what it's meant to suggest, I said. She did not argue. That was the moment I understood. This was not about my mental state. This was about narrative, and the narrative had already been written. I was the problem. My concern was the symptom. My insistence was the evidence. My husband's calm explanations were the cure. I lay back against the pillow and closed my eyes. Not to rest, to think. I replayed the timeline, the surgery, the sedation, the papers. The tone changed, the staff alignment, the documentation, the way concern had slowly replaced consent. I realized something else then. This had been planned before I ever entered the hospital. Not every detail, but the direction, the outcome. I remembered conversations from months earlier. My husband is asking questions about contingencies, about what would happen if I couldn't manage things, about simplifying responsibilities. I remembered signing a document during a routine appointment, just in case, he had said. I remembered not reading every line, because I trusted him. The realization hurt less than the certainty, because certainty gave me ground to stand on. That afternoon, when my husband left to take a call, I asked the nurse for a phone, not my cell, a hospital phone. I asked her to dial a number I knew by heart, an attorney I had consulted years earlier for an unrelated matter. She hesitated, then she dialed. When he answered, I spoke slowly, clearly. I told him exactly where I was, exactly what had been signed, exactly what language was being used. There was a pause on the line. Then he said something that confirmed everything I had begun to understand. This is a classic case of substituted authority through incapacity framing, he said. I asked him what that meant. It means someone is positioning themselves as your voice by documenting your silence, he replied. I asked him if I still had rights. Yes, he said. But time matters. I thanked him and hung up. When my husband returned, I looked at him differently, not as my partner, not as my caretaker, but as someone who had crossed a line and expected me not to notice. He smiled when he saw me, relieved, calm. We're making progress, he said. I nodded. Yes, I replied. We are, but not in the way you think. That was the realization, not that I was powerless, but that I had been underestimated. And once I understood that, fear had nowhere left to live. Only focus, only resolve, because I was no longer trying to be heard. I was preparing to be undeniable. The collapse did not come with shouting. It came with silence, the kind of silence that follows when a plan stops working and no one knows what to do next. It began the following morning. A different nurse entered my room. She moved more carefully than the others. She asked permission before adjusting anything. She spoke directly to me, not past me. That alone told me something had shifted. An hour later, a hospital administrator arrived with a clipboard. She introduced herself and sat down instead of standing over me. We need to clarify a few things, she said. Clarify. That word had replaced justify. My husband sat in the chair by the window. He crossed his legs, uncrossed them. He checked his phone once, then put it face down. The administrator asked me to explain, in my own words, what I understood about the documents that had been signed. I explained calmly. I explained clearly. I explained without emotion. I watched her nod as I spoke. Then she asked my husband to explain. His words were the same as before. Concern, stress, protection. But something was missing. Authority. The administrator asked him one question that changed the temperature of the room. Did your wife ever state she was unable to make decisions for herself? He hesitated, just briefly. No, he said. The administrator made a note. Did a physician formally assess her capacity at the time the documents were signed? He shifted in his seat. Not formally, he said. Another note. Did you inform her that the authority granted was immediate and not conditional? His voice tightened. I believed it was implied. The administrator closed the folder. Implied is not consent, she said. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in days. Later that afternoon, a social worker came to see me. She asked questions, but they were different now. They were not traps. They were confirmations. She asked about my finances, my routines, my understanding of my situation. She asked if I felt pressured. I said yes. She asked by whom. I said to my husband. The word landed in the room and did not disappear. By evening, the tone had changed everywhere. The staff spoke to me first. Forms were handed to me, not him. Questions were directed to my face. My husband noticed. I could see it in the way he sat straighter, in the way his voice lost its ease. That night, he did not stay late. He kissed my forehead and said he was tired. He did not ask if I needed anything. The collapse continued quietly the next day. The attorney arrived in person. He reviewed the documents. He spoke to the administration. He used words like revocation and improper execution, words my husband did not interrupt. By noon, the hospital formally amended my records. Language about confusion was removed. Decision-making authority was restored to me. My husband was informed, politely, that further decisions would require my direct approval. He stood very still when he heard. I watched something fold inward on him, not guilt, loss of control. That evening, he finally spoke honestly. You didn't have to take it this far, he said. This far, I replied, is where you took it. He looked at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I thought I was helping, he said. You were helping yourself, I answered. The collapse reached its quiet end the following morning. I was discharged. The paperwork was handed to me. My name alone. My husband followed behind me down the hallway. He did not touch my arm. He did not offer to carry my bag. Outside, the air felt different, not freer, clearer. We stood by the car for a moment. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I understood then that the collapse was complete, not because he had been exposed, but because the version of me he had relied on no longer existed, and there was nothing left for him to stand on. The plan had failed. The narrative had unraveled, and what remained was a truth he could not rewrite. I was still here, still capable, and no longer willing to disappear quietly. I did not go home with him. That was the first decision I made entirely on my own after leaving the hospital. It was small on the surface, a change in direction, a different set of keys, but it carried the weight of everything that had come before it. I stayed with my sister for a while, just long enough to breathe without being watched, long enough to remember what my own rhythm felt like. The guest room smelled faintly of laundry soap and old books. At night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. My husband called, not often. When he did, his voice was careful. We should talk, he said. I agreed. Eventually. When we met, it was not in our house. It was a quiet place, neutral. a table between us. 2 cups of coffee cooled as we spoke. He explained himself again. Stress, fear, love, the same words, rearranged. I listened without interrupting. Then I told him something he had not prepared for. I told him that trust does not survive control, that love does not excuse erasure, that signing papers behind someone's back is not protection, it is betrayal. He asked if I was leaving. I told him I already had, not dramatically, not angrily, just honestly. In the weeks that followed, my life became quieter, not empty, intentional. I handled my own appointments again, read every document, asked questions without apology. I noticed how differently people responded when I did. Clarity has a way of changing rooms. I did not rush to rebuild anything. I let things stay unsettled. Peace needs space to arrive. Some mornings, I sat by the window and watched light move across the floor. I thought about how close I had come to losing myself without anyone raising their voice, how easily concern had become authority, how quickly silence had been mistaken for consent. I thought about how many women my age are praised for endurance and punished for resistance. I will not be one of them anymore. My husband and I speak now, but carefully, with boundaries, with honesty that does not bend to comfort. Whether we remain married is still an unanswered question, and for the first time I am not afraid of that, because my life no longer rests on someone else's signature. It rests with me. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, trust that feeling. You are not difficult for wanting to be included. You are not confused for asking questions. You are not ungrateful for protecting your autonomy. Silence can be strength, but only when it is chosen. Thank you for staying with my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you feel less alone, you're welcome here. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, a simple act of support helps this voice reach others who need it. Sometimes, reclaiming your life begins with realizing you were never invisible at all.